Hello there. Having done the inside of the compartments and putting on the deck, I can now proceed with closing in this part of the hull, the towers. So that's what we are going to do today. I measure how big covers I need. I will leave 7.5 centimeter for the cross beams, but will cover the rest with 4mm plywood. I measure 3 times each stretch, so that I can spot any potential errors when I draw the cutting line. Now I can cut out the piece I need and check that it fits. I continue cutting out the rest of the material that I need to cover all sides of the tower. Also small adjustment pieces that will seal the small gaps. Having all the cover pieces ready, I start thinking about the support. I have used quarter rounds earlier, but the curvature is not perfect for glass to follow, as there might form a void where the rounding meets the board. Instead, I will try to split the square into 2 parts. I need about 30 centimeters for each side. As I get 2 pieces out of the square, this will be enough for 1 tower. The surface isn't good enough after the cutting. Thus, I trim the surface flat with a rasp. This should work as a side support. In the corner, I will need to cut the pieces to 45 degrees angle, so that the 2 pieces meets without gaps. Now I can start gluing. I add the side first, as I want to have access to the inside as long as possible. I temporarily secure the cover with masking tape. I can also add the support along the sides. These are also secured temporarily with masking tape. I continue around the edge with adding the pieces and move on to the other tower. The day after, I can remove the tape and remove some spillage to get a smooth surface. To get help from gravitation for the next step, I turn the hull. Then I prepare to laminate the surfaces. I will glass over the inside to make it watertight. With some tapping, I remove the air and wet out the cloth before I add the next sheet. I continue around the surfaces in both towers. After a couple of hours, I'm back and overfill the cloth. Later I can turn the hull again and add glass on the other side. On this side I do not add any support, as this side will not carry the load from the crossbeam. I need to fill out the unevenness between the cover and the hull. This is to make it possible to laminate the outside. Here I use a low-weight epoxy filler. It doesn't need to be so strong. At the same time, I clean cut the glass to prepare for inside painting. I will use the same 2-component polyurethane paint that I used earlier on the inside. It's a small paint job, but it's much easier to do it now before I close the top cover. For the next step, I turn the hull. I prepare glass for the top cover and pre-wet the inside of the top cover before I laminate the inside. Now I can start closing the tower. To limit dropping of epoxy into the hull, I work from below. First I smear thickened epoxy on the bonding surfaces. Then I prepare for an extra hand that will help me hold the cover. As the cover is angled, the small part falls down, but with masking tape and persistence I get it in place for both towers. Moving outside so that I can sand the outside. I just need to smoothen out the filler, and as it's a small job I work with the hand sander until it's smooth. With the longboard I also get the surface to get smoother around the tower. I want the tower to blend in well with the rest of the hull. As the epoxy has cured, I can remove the rest of the masking tape and sand this as well. Well inside again, I can prepare for glassing in the outside. Where the bolts holding the crossbeam will rest, I add thicker glass. Here I will use 300 gram per square meter glass instead of the 150 gram per square meter that I have used mostly. I overfill edges and gaps with thickened epoxy. This is to avoid air bubbles to form later as less viscous epoxy escapes. Then I add less viscous epoxy to wet out the wood before I add the glass. And wet that out. Around corners it's hard to get the glass to follow. The thicker glass wets out rather well. Now I can't do much more tonight. A last overfill with epoxy before I let it cure. The day after I can clean cut the towers and cut glass to cover the sides, so that I can laminate these small areas as well. This is all for this time. I hope to see you back here next week.